Thank you so very much. It's great to be here, and hello to everybody out there in Zoom land. I hope that you can see everything. I'm going to try not to stand too far in front of everything so that I don't block views. I've got about 20 minutes or so to go through a lot of new material that's very relevant to our world today. And it's all about the impact of coronavirus. And frankly, of the billions of people on this planet, I don't think there's anybody who's not impacted in some way or another, both from a personal perspective and a business perspective. So all of you are in the pharmacology business, so I'm not going to go into the aspects of the disease itself, other than just to give you a couple of hints of where new jobs are and new technologies that might be useful in your thinking might lie. So the way I'm going to structure this is to first share with you just one technology, and believe me, I had a huge slide pack before I condensed it, but the one technology that I think is the game changer. Then talk a bit about what I see as part of the new normal. And again, this is just a fraction of all the things that are going to happen. I've got a slide pack that already has 60 new normal slides, and we obviously don't have time to do that today. And then I'm going to take a little mini tour of some of the new jobs of the future, things that you'll need to think about as directors in terms of staffing skills. So here we go on a little mini whirlwind. And let's see if this will work. Of course it won't. So, oh dear. We had it working before. This is technology, isn't it? Okay, the very first thing I'd like to talk to you about is of artificial intelligence, big data, and quantum computing. Talk about weird and wonderful. Quantum computing doesn't get more weird and wonderful than that. I'm not going to give you a physics lecture, but what I will say is that it has the unbelievable potential for double exponential growth. So many of you may have heard of Moore's law of processing speed doubling every 18 months or so. Imagine a double exponential rate. We're talking orders of magnitude where computing is getting a lot faster. And that has a direct impact on the combination of artificial intelligence and its ability to crunch through these massive data sets that we're accumulating. So just to backtrack a little bit, when I talk about AI, I'm talking about a whole smorgasbord of technologies. So you might have heard techniques like machine learning and deep learning. They're all part of AI in terms of data analytics. But it also covers things like natural language processing, voice interfaces, text-based interfaces, facial recognition, image recognition, gesture recognition, smart robots, driverless cars, and the list goes on and on and on. So why I say that this is the game-changing technology is that I cannot think of any industry in the world that will not be impacted by artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form, or any person, unless they're in a remote area, that will also not be impacted by artificial intelligence. So now I'd like to go on to the new normal. And believe me, from a futurist perspective, this is really challenging because we are in such a fast-moving and unknown environment. But let me share some observations with you. So first of all, I think that over the next foreseeable period, which may last just a couple of years to all the way up to 2030, we're going to see massive impacts because of the virus on our workforce, where we're going to be able to congregate in groups, and then we're going to be told, nope, back to lockdown, work from home. We've already started to prove in these early days of COVID-19 that working from home with the right tools is effective in a lot of situations, especially for white-collar workers. Because frankly, it doesn't matter if you're sitting at your computer working on a spreadsheet in your office or in your house. But when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry and you're talking about expensive instrumentation, how is that all going to work when you're trying to do it from home? Well, there is a potential answer, and that involves technologies like augmented and virtual reality, where you're immersed into a virtual world, and haptics, which is this sense of touch and feel, and telerobotics. So if you mesh all those technologies together, then it actually becomes possible for you as a science organization to continue doing scientific experiments with people working from home, provided that they're armed with the right tools and super, super high bandwidth. And I'm not talking current NBN speeds, I'm talking much, much higher bandwidth. In the general population, when it comes to returning from work, I think we're going to see massive shifts that do last for years. And what we're going to see is, I think in the longer term, a staggered return to work where we start to try it, see how it goes, see whether the virus is contained, and then pull back if we have to, or continue to expand if we need to. Another thing that we're going to see is a clustered return of employees, let's say in a particular department, so that you're not saying, okay, as an organization, I've got finance and I've got IT and blah, 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 blah. You're not going to bring them all back at one time. I would suggest that a more constrained way of doing this is to bring individual groups back, still with social distancing and so on. But that way, if there is a potential breakout, we know who might be in contact so that we can better get our hands on what's happening. There's so much more I can say about remote working, but time will not let me do that. But we can do it in the Q&A for sure. Another thing that is absolutely on the cards, and it's already happened in Australia, is moving into a recession and then a depression. A couple of days ago, we had the official announcement that in the last period, Australia, for the first time in 30 years, has officially entered into a depression. That is bad news. And let me tell you, I think we're just at, unfortunately, the precipice, because here in Australia, we have JobKeeper and we also have mortgage deferral. And JobKeeper, they'll have a 2.0 that still is a little airy-fairy in how it's going to work. That will start after the September quarter. And the benefits will drop, so that will also have an impact on people and spending, both in business and consumer land. And on top of that, we have these mortgage deferrals that a lot of people are counting on, and that is meant to come to an end also towards the end of the September period. So we're potentially poised on a real cliff, and we need to make sure that we don't have a cliff and catch a lot of people out, because otherwise we could just completely destroy our economy for a very long time. So what I think we're going to start to see, and I'm already noticing it, is a new austerity amongst both individuals and businesses. In fact, I was talking to a small business owner in one of the shopping centers that I frequent because I'm in walking distance, so I get to know all the owners. And he was saying to me that every day he keeps his store open, he's losing $500. There's only so long that small businesses can continue with that kind of loss before they say, I give up. And this economy and the economies of many countries around the world are really based on small business. If we start to see small business tank, then that has an impact on all business, large and small, and the entire economy. So we've got a double whammy problem. Now, one thing that we would have all noticed during COVID is empty shelves, right? Have any of you not experienced wanting to buy something and it's just not there? Even today, there are certain things that I can't get, including medications, because they're sourced from overseas. And that's an issue for your organization, because here in Australia, you're not actually doing the manufacturing, you're actually looking at the supply chain and waiting for shipments to come in from overseas. And depending on what's happening at the manufacturing site or sites, depends on when you get shipments and how much you can sell, and that impacts your local revenue, and it's out of your control. So what can you possibly do? Is there a solution? Well, in general, I think what we're going to start to see is a move to much more onshore manufacturing, where we bring things back into Australia or whatever country we happen to be talking about and start rebuilding our own ecosystem so that we are not dependent on foreign shipments. From a pharmaceutical perspective, how might that work? And here's where it's really interesting. 3D printing, additive manufacturing, is the technology that I think is going to be fundamental to onshoring manufacturing. So not building huge factories and so on, but actually using machines that only need a relatively small crew of people to be able to produce the goods that we require here. And 3D printing is a lot more sophisticated than people know. One quick example from the pharma industry. In 2013 in Glasgow, Scotland, an organic chemist designed a prototype 3D printer that was able to print organic chemicals used in the manufacture of drugs. So if you can imagine, you're the local sales arm, if you like, of a global multinational pharmaceutical. What if the CAD files for the particular prescriptions were sent to you securely, and you have the appropriate kinds of 3D printers to print locally? That could start to solve a supply chain issue that you might run into. And that's just one of many, many ideas for different industries. Another thing that's happened in the new normal is the absolute decimation of the airline industry. Qantas just a few weeks ago posted profits down of 91% for the last fiscal year. And I suspect that if they hadn't had the flights pre-COVID, they would have probably been in a loss. I was actually happy to hear that they had a small profit. But if you think about all the fleets of airplanes around the world that are grounded, we can recognize that this is a big problem that has flow-ons for lots of industries. And it's not just airlines, it's ships as well. You know, there are pilots that are being made redundant that may never find jobs again, boat captains. There are entire fleets of airplanes that may just go into the rust bucket, you know, airline graveyard. It's absolutely devastating for tourism as well. And even just with all these border closures inside of Australia, traveling has become a big problem. So I think one of the things we may see with aviation is refitting some of these fleets to become primarily cargo bearing with just maybe small passenger sections where you pay a premium to be a passenger, you're socially distanced, but where the airline makes the money is actually in the cargo hauling. So let's go into some of the new jobs of the future. Look, I would have been, if you had asked me a year ago, really, really optimistic on new jobs of the future because technology is changing jobs, no question about it, and especially automation. But there were lots of new jobs that I was able to put my finger on. What worries me now is because of COVID and the massive job losses that are happening, how can we make this up in the midst of this rapid automation move? But nonetheless, I've defined a couple of new jobs that I think will be of interest to this audience. One that I'm calling an AI trainer. And if you know anything about artificial intelligence, you'll know that the way that it learns is using either machine learning or deep learning and lots of data. So data gets fed at it, and then the AI gets, programmed, and sometimes it makes really bad mistakes that aren't ethical or that are just plain old wrong. And we need people, data scientists, that use techniques like reinforcement learning to start teaching the AI to do things better, or how to remove social biases from their outputs, or how a driverless car might make a decision about, well, what do I do in the case of an unavoidable accident? Do the people in the vehicle get hurt, or does the pedestrian get hurt, or do the people in another vehicle get hurt? Who gets to make those decisions? So an AI ethicist is going to be part of this as well. And this also incorporates robotic training, which could include humans in virtual reality suits and using telepresence to teach robots how to move about spatially. So there are a lot of aspects to this. Another new job that I think will be particularly relevant to your industry are chatbots. So most of you would have probably used a chatbot on your phone or on the web, and it's probably text-based, right? And it gets a little bit frustrating, and they tend to be kind of dumb right now. Where this is moving into the future will be natural language voice interfaces, where you'll be talking to chatbots that have been sufficiently trained on big databases and start talking like humans with ums and ahs, and you won't even know that it's not a human that you're talking to. And you could deploy those kinds of chatbots with specific personalities and have them answer a lot of questions from patients with symptoms that might be interested in your pharmaceuticals, or for scientists or other doctors. So you'd have, if you like, two different chatbots, one that was consumer friendly and one that was doctor scientist friendly, or maybe even more that are used internally as well. Another big industry for the medical community will be brain-machine interface specialist. So this is where we start going a little bit futuristic, but I'm not really that far off the mark. If any of you have been reading about what Elon Musk has been doing with Neuralink, you'll know that brain-machine interfaces are not science fiction anymore. They're actually becoming scientific experiments and science reality quite potentially very, very soon. So what we're talking about are putting interfaces into our body, not too dissimilar to pacemakers or other things that we've been doing, but on a much, much smaller scale. But with brain-machine interfaces, we're actually directly connecting into our neocortex and controlling things. In a press conference just a little while ago, Elon Musk was talking about having Neuralink being able to control moods or maybe streaming music directly into your head. I'm not so sure I'd want to be the first person to get that. And frankly, I think I'd rather listen to my music outside of my head. But nonetheless, we will be seeing people that are specialists in this field, and it will become a new job category that's a big one in the medical space. And the last one that I'll talk about is a nanomedic, because in my view, nanobots and genetic engineering and regenerative medicine and precision medicine, that's really the future of where we want to see the medical world go. How cool would it be if we were to have fast forwarded, say, 10 years or 15 years, and all of us have nanobots in our body that are preventative little bots that look for any sign of infection, no matter how tiny it is, including viruses, and as soon as it spots it, wham, eats it right up. We wouldn't have this epidemic that we're in the middle of, or I should say pandemic that we're in the middle of right now. But on the other hand, if we put nanobots into our body and something goes wrong, who are you going to call and what are you going to do? So there are going to be a whole lot of jobs that spin out of this relatively new technology, but it's not science fiction. There are already research labs around the world doing all kinds of work with nanobots. There was 2 years ago a study in China collaborating with Arizona State University where they had nanobots that were able to detect particular types of blood cancer and actually stop the blood supply to the cancer-ridden cell, basically starving this cancer and killing it. So that's all for my little mini presentation, and then we'll get into the panel and we can go into a really cool discussion. Thank you very much.